Victor was a bright and active 10-year-old who loved reading stories and playing soccer. However, most afternoons, he returned to an empty house as his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor, were always busy running their business at the local market. "I'm so bored staying here alone," he once complained. His mother, though sympathetic, explained, "We are sorry, Victor, but it's only for a few hours. We have to work hard to provide for your education and future." Though Victor understood, he sometimes wished they had more time for him. Then, one day, Mrs. Daniel had an idea. "Why don't we ask our neighbor, Auntie Vero, to look after you until we get home?" she suggested. Auntie Vero was a friendly woman in her late 20s who lived alone. Victor liked her because she was always cheerful and often gave him small gifts. With his parents' approval, he started spending his afternoons at her house. At first, everything seemed fine. She welcomed him with a warm smile and always had a plate of food ready. They would chat about his school day, and she even let him watch cartoons on her small TV. One day, she surprised him with a Game Boy. "This is for you, Victor," she said softly. "You're like the little brother I never had. I'll get you anything you want." Though initially shy, Victor thanked her excitedly. But from that moment, things started to change. One afternoon, Auntie Vero introduced a new game. "This is just for the two of us," she whispered. "No one else can know." Victor didn't understand the game at first. But soon, he realized it was something different, something he didn't like. She made him do things he couldn't comprehend, leaving him confused and scared. "Auntie, I don't like this game," he protested one day. "Don't worry, Victor," she reassured him. "You'll learn to enjoy it." But he never did. What started as a secret game became a daily ordeal. He dreaded going to her house. He began staying late at school, dragging his feet on the way home, hoping his parents would return before he had to go to Auntie Vero's. One evening, Victor gathered his courage and approached his mother in the kitchen. "Mommy, I need to tell you something," he said hesitantly. But before he could continue, she cut him off. "Victor, I know we are not always there for you, but Auntie Vero is filling that gap. You grow to like her. Now, go finish your homework." Crushed, Victor left the kitchen and cried silently in his room. He didn't understand why his parents wouldn't listen. And then, the nightmares started. He began wetting the bed, something he hadn't done since he was a toddler. Terrified and ashamed, he hid it from his parents. But the fear never left him. The next time he was at Auntie Vero's, he gathered all his courage. "Auntie, I don't like your game," he said. "It makes me wet my bed. I don't feel well." Her expression changed for a moment before she smiled. "That's normal, Victor. It happens to boys your age. You grow out of it." But he wasn't comforted. The fear kept growing, affecting his schoolwork and friendships. He withdrew from his classmates, no longer playing during recess. His teacher, Mrs. Nedu, noticed the change. One day, after class, she called him over. "Victor, is something wrong? You can talk to me." He hesitated, head bowed in shame. "Everything is fine," he lied. But Mrs. Nedu wasn't convinced. She knew something was terribly wrong. The next day, after another unsettling afternoon at Auntie Vero's, Victor couldn't take it anymore. He waited until class was over, then approached his teacher. "Auntie, I have something to tell you," he murmured, eyes darting nervously around the room. Leaning closer, he whispered, "Our neighbor, Auntie Vero, makes me do things I can't describe." Mrs. Nedu listened intently, her face grave. "You've done the right thing, Victor," she said gently. "You don't have to feel ashamed. We are going to help you." She immediately reported the matter to the school administration. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. Okafor were summoned to the headmistress's office. Is Kobe in trouble? Mrs. Omori asked, anxious. Please, take a seat, the headmistress said. What we are about to discuss is serious. Your son has shared something very disturbing about your neighbor, Auntie Vero. Mrs. Okafor's face turned pale as she listened. She did what? Mr. Okafor roared, clenching his fist. After much discussion, they decided to involve the authorities. That evening, Mrs. Okafor personally picked up Victor from school. I'm so sorry, my son, she said, tears rolling down her face. I should have listened to you. But we'll fix this. You're safe now. Later that night, a firm knock echoed at Auntie Vero's door. When she opened it, she was met with the stern faces of 3 uniformed police officers. Miss Vero, you are under arrest for child molestation, one officer stated. You must be mistaken, she protested, panic in her voice. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court, the officer continued as he handcuffed her. From his bedroom window, Victor watched as she was led away. For the first time in a long while, he let out a deep sigh of relief. In the weeks that followed, his parents became more involved in his life, taking turns picking him up from school and spending time with him. Mrs. Nedu encouraged him to open up whenever he needed help, ensuring he and the other children knew they had a safe space to speak out. Though Victor still struggled with nightmares and occasional bedwetting, his parents sought professional help for him. With time, he began healing. If there's one lesson from Victor's story, it's this: always listen to children. Their voices matter. If you ever suspect something is wrong, take action. No child should suffer in silence.